chief of the Korean Mafia with OCD, caught the cleaning lady sleeping in his chair, then took her freedom away. On March 28, 2023, in the quiet city of Miryang, an exhausted foreign cleaner was found asleep in the personal chair of one of the country's most feared and private men. Until that moment, no one imagined that a brief lapse of fatigue could change the course of two lives forever. But hours later, an unexpected gesture from this withdrawn man revealed a deep and unexplainable bond between them, something even she could not understand. And the strangest part is that everything began with a payment she never asked for. If you want more stories like this, follow the channel, like the video, and tell us where you are watching from. The rain hammered against the glass walls of the private building in Miryang with the kind of fury that only comes during Korea's monsoon season. Each drop seemed to mirror the exhaustion flowing through Amale Duarte's veins as she pushed through the revolving door at 2:47 a.m., her cleaning cart squeaking against the polished marble floor. 18 hours. That's how long she'd been awake, moving from one building to another, scrubbing floors that would be dirty again by morning, wiping windows that would fog up with the next breath. Her hands, raw and cracked despite the cheap lotion she applied religiously, trembled as she swiped her employee card at the elevator leading to the top floor, the private office of Han Ji-seok. Even his name carried weight in Miryang. People whispered it with a mixture of respect and fear, though no one ever explained exactly why. The building management had been clear. Enter after hours, clean quickly, touch nothing unnecessarily, and above all, leave everything exactly as you found it. Mr. Han's standards weren't just high, they were absolute. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime that echoed too loudly in the silence. Amali stepped into a hallway so pristine it looked like a photograph. The air smelled of expensive leather and something crisp, maybe eucalyptus. Her worn sneakers felt like an insult against the spotless floor. She unlocked the office door, and her breath caught. The space was vast, minimalist, almost clinical in its perfection. A single desk sat at the center, positioned with mathematical precision, beneath a cold blue light that hummed faintly overhead. Everything, the pens, the documents, even the angle of the chair, seemed to exist in calculated harmony. It wasn't just clean, it was controlled. Amali had cleaned hundreds of offices, but this one felt different. It felt like it was watching her. She began her routine, starting with the windows that overlooked the sleeping city. Her reflection stared back at her, a young woman whose eyes had lost their brightness somewhere between paying rent and sending money home to Brazil. Her mother's face flashed in her mind, the medical bills, the unanswered prayers, the constant weight of not being enough. Her vision blurred. She blinked hard, shaking her head. Not now. Just finish. Go home. Sleep. But as she moved to dust the desk, her legs betrayed her. A wave of dizziness crashed over her so suddenly that she had to grip the edge of the table to keep from falling. The room tilted. Her heart pounded in her ears. Just for a second, she told herself. Just 1 second, to steady myself. The chair was right there. Black leather. Perfectly centered. Inviting in a way that felt almost cruel. She knew she shouldn't. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong. But her body had already made the decision. She sank into the seat, and it was like being embraced by a cloud. The air conditioning breathed cool air across her face. The distant sound of rain became a lullaby. Her eyes, burning from exhaustion, drifted closed. Just a second. Just 1 second. The sound of the door opening was like thunder in a silent church. Amale's eyes snapped open, her heart immediately slamming against her ribs. She tried to stand, but her body was still caught between sleep and panic. And then she saw him. Han Ji-seok stood in the doorway, perfectly still. He was younger than she'd imagined, maybe in his early 30s, with sharp features that seemed carved rather than born. His black suit was immaculate despite the late hour, his tie still perfectly knotted. But it was his eyes that paralyzed her, dark, intense, and fixed on her with an expression she couldn't read. Not anger, not surprise, something else entirely, something that made her skin prickle. I'm so sorry, Amale stammered, finally managing to stand. Her legs wobbled. I didn't mean to. He didn't speak. He simply walked forward with measured steps, each footfall deliberate and silent. The space between them shrank with terrifying slowness. When he reached the desk, he stopped exactly 2 feet away from her. Up close, she could see the slight tension in his jaw, the way his fingers twitched at his sides, as if resisting some compulsion. His gaze moved from her face to the chair, then back again. "Do you know?" he said quietly, his voice smooth but carrying an edge like silk wrapped around steel. "How many people have sat in that chair?" Amali shook her head, unable to find words. "One." His eyes didn't blink. "Until tonight." The weight of those words pressed down on her chest. She wanted to apologize again, to explain, to disappear into the floor. But before she could speak, he did something unexpected. He reached out and touched her shoulder. It was gentle, just his fingertips, barely making contact through her worn uniform. But the moment his hand connected, something shifted in his expression. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. His breath caught in a way that seemed involuntary, vulnerable. For 3 seconds, neither of them moved. The blue light hummed above. The rain continued its assault on the windows. And in that suspended moment, Amali felt the terrifying certainty that something irreversible had just occurred. When he withdrew his hand, his face had closed again, but his voice emerged softer, almost fractured. "What's your name?" "Amali. Amali Duarte." He repeated it once, as if testing how it felt in his mouth. Then he stepped back, creating distance that somehow felt more intimate than proximity. "You're exhausted," he observed. Not a question. A statement of fact delivered without judgment. "I've been working," she managed. "I have to send money. My mother, she's—" "I know." Those 2 words stopped her cold. How could he know? She'd never met this man before tonight. And yet he spoke with the certainty of someone who'd already read every page of her life. He moved to the other side of the desk, his movements precise, almost ritualistic. When he looked at her again, something in his expression had changed. It was no longer just observational. It was decisive. "Amali Duarte," he said, and the way he spoke her name felt like a signature on a contract she hadn't agreed to. From this moment forward, everything changes. She wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to demand an explanation, but the words died in her throat when she saw the intensity in his gaze. Not threatening, but absolute. Final. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, yet each word landed with the weight of an anchor. "From this moment on, your life is no longer just yours." The room seemed to contract. The blue light flickered once, and Amali understood, with a clarity that terrified her, that she had just crossed a threshold from which there was no return. Not because she'd fallen asleep in his chair, but because when he'd touched her shoulder, something in him had broken open, and something in her had been caught in the flood. The morning light felt like an accusation, as Amali sat on the narrow bed in her rented room, staring at her phone. 3 missed calls from the hospital in São Paulo. Each notification was a knife twisting deeper into her chest. She hadn't slept after leaving DeSeoc's office. His words echoed in her mind like a curse she couldn't shake. "Your life is no longer just yours." What did that mean? Was it a threat? A promise? The memory of his fingertips on her shoulder made her skin prickle with an emotion she couldn't name, something between fear and recognition, as if her body had remembered something her mind refused to acknowledge. At 9 a.m., her phone rang. Unknown number. Her hands trembled as she answered. "Ms. Duarte?" The voice was crisp, professional, speaking Korean with the efficiency of someone who valued every second. "This is the building management office. We're calling to inform you that your access card has been deactivated. You are no longer authorized to enter the premises." The words hit her like a physical blow. "What? But I need this job. I didn't do anything wrong, The decision is final. Your final payment will be deposited by the end of the week." "Good day." The line went dead. Amali sat frozen, the phone still pressed against her ear, listening to the silence that had swallowed her livelihood. Fired. She'd been fired for falling asleep in his chair. The panic rose in her throat like bile. Without this job, without the night shift pay, how would she cover the rent? How would she send money home? As if summoned by her despair, her phone rang again. This time, the screen showed a number she recognized. The hospital in São Paulo. Her mother's hospital. "Ms. Duarte?" The doctor's voice was grave, each word carefully measured. "I'm calling about your mother's condition. She's experienced complications. We need to perform an emergency procedure immediately. But the cost, How much? Amale interrupted, though she already knew the answer would be impossible. The number he stated made her vision blur. It was more than she earned in 6 months, more than she could borrow, more than existed in her entire reality. Without the procedure, I'm afraid we're looking at a very different conversation within the next 72 hours, the doctor continued, his clinical tone doing nothing to soften the brutality of what he was saying. Her mother was dying, and she was helpless to stop it. I'll find a way, Amale whispered, though she had no idea how. Please, just give me time. She ended the call and let the tears come. They fell silently, soaking into her worn shirt, each drop carrying the weight of every sacrifice that had brought her to Korea. Every night she'd worked until her hands bled. Every moment she'd convinced herself it would be enough. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. An hour later, she found herself walking through Miryang's streets in a daze, searching for free Wi-Fi to contact her family. The city moved around her, merchants opening shops, students hurrying to hagwons, elderly women selling vegetables at street corners, all of it feeling distant, like she was watching life through frosted glass. She found a small cafe and ordered the cheapest item on the menu just to access their internet. As she waited for her email to load, a shadow fell across her table. Ms. Duarte? She looked up to find an older man in a neat gray suit, his expression neutral, but his eyes carrying a strange mixture of pity and something else. Calculation, perhaps. I'm Mr. Bayek. I manage the building where you worked last night. He sat down without asking permission, placing a thick manila envelope on the table between them. Mr. Han asked me to deliver this to you personally. Amale stared at the envelope as if it might bite her. I don't understand. He fired me. Mr. Han doesn't fire people directly, Mr. Beck said carefully. He simply rearranges circumstances. With shaking hands, Amale opened the envelope. Inside were documents printed on expensive paper, official stamps, and, her breath caught, a bank transfer receipt. She read the amount once, then twice, then a third time, certain she was misreading the zeros. It was the exact amount the doctor had quoted, down to the last one. How does he know? She whispered. Mr. Beck's expression remained carefully neutral. Mr. Han knows what he needs to know. The payment has already been processed. Your mother's procedure will be covered in full. Relief flooded through her with such force that she thought she might collapse. Her mother would live. The nightmare was over. But even as gratitude overwhelmed her, a colder feeling crept in beneath it. There was no such thing as free salvation. Everything had a price. What does he want from me? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Before Mr. Beck could answer, another figure appeared at the cafe entrance. A woman in her 40s, wearing a sharp black suit and carrying herself with the rigid precision of someone who'd learned to suppress every spontaneous emotion. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed painful, and her eyes scanned the cafe with the efficiency of a surveillance camera. Ms. Duarte, the woman said, her voice carrying an authority that made even Mr. Bayek straighten slightly. I'm Kang Mijin, Mr. Han's executive assistant. We need to discuss the terms of your arrangement. Arrangement? Amale repeated. I didn't agree to any arrangement. Mijin's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. You accepted the payment. That was the agreement. She produced another set of documents from her leather portfolio, laying them out with methodical care. Employment contract. Non-disclosure agreement. Relocation authorization. The words swam before Amale's eyes. Legal terminology she barely understood. Clauses that seemed to spiral into infinity. What is this? Amale demanded, fear sharpening her voice. Your new position, Mijin replied simply. Effective immediately. You'll be transferred to Mr. Han's private residence in Busan. Full-time, live-in position. All expenses covered. Salary significantly above market rate. I can't just move to Busan. Your mother's continued care depends on your compliance, Mijin interrupted, her tone remaining perfectly professional, even as she delivered the threat. The hospital has been notified that payment is contingent on your fulfillment of contractual obligations. The cafe suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. Amale looked at Mr. Bayek, hoping to find some ally, but he avoided her gaze, suddenly fascinated by his own hands. You're blackmailing me, Amale said quietly. We're offering you an opportunity, Mijin corrected. One that saves your mother's life and provides you with financial stability. Many would consider that generous. Amale's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. She thought of her mother's face, the way she'd smiled even through the pain during their last video call. She thought of Jiseok's words, "Your life is no longer just yours." She'd thought he was speaking philosophically. She'd been wrong. "Where do I sign?" she heard herself ask, the words tasting like surrender. Mijin produced a pen, expensive and heavy. As Amale signed her name on document after document, she felt each stroke of ink like a chain being locked into place. When she finished, Mijin collected the papers with brisk efficiency. "A car will pick you up tomorrow at 6 a.m., she said. "Bring only essentials. Everything else will be provided." She turned to leave, then paused, glancing back with an expression that might have been sympathy if it weren't so carefully controlled. "For what it's worth, Ms. Duarte, Mr. Han doesn't do anything without reason. Whatever his purpose, it's never simple." Then she was gone, leaving Amale alone with Mr. Beck and the weight of what she'd just agreed to. "What kind of man is he?" Amale asked quietly. Mr. Beck finally met her eyes, and for the first time, she saw genuine concern there. The kind who doesn't let go once he's decided something matters. The drive from Miryang to Busan took 3 hours, but to Amale, it felt like crossing into another dimension. The black sedan that picked her up was more luxurious than any car she'd ever been inside. Leather seats that seemed to mold to her body, tinted windows that turned the world outside into shadows, and a silence so complete it made her own breathing sound intrusive. Mijin sat beside her, working on a tablet, her fingers moving with mechanical precision. She hadn't spoken since they'd left, and Amale was too afraid to break the silence. Instead, she watched the landscape transform through the window, rural fields giving way to industrial zones, then suddenly opening up to reveal the ocean, vast and glittering under the afternoon sun. Busan rose before them like a promise and a threat. Skyscrapers pierced the sky, their glass facades reflecting clouds and sea in equal measure. The Marine City District loomed ahead, where Korea's wealthiest kept their fortresses above the waves. Amale's stomach tightened with each kilometer that brought her closer to her new prison. The car pulled into an underground garage beneath a building that seemed to defy physics. All glass and steel, spiraling upward like a crystalline tornado. They took a private elevator that required both a keycard and a fingerprint scan. Mijin pressed the button for the top floor, the 47th floor. "Before we enter," Mijin said, finally breaking her silence as the elevator climbed, "you need to understand the rules. Mr. Han's living space operates on strict protocols. Everything has a place. Everything has a time. Deviation is not tolerated." "I understand cleanliness," Amale replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've been cleaning for years." "This isn't about cleanliness," Mijin corrected, her tone suggesting Amale had missed the point entirely. "This is about order. There's a difference." The elevator doors opened, and Amale stepped into a space that stole her breath. The penthouse was a cathedral of glass and light. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire perimeter, offering a 360-degree view of Busan, the ocean to one side, the city sprawling endlessly to the other, mountains in the distance. But it was the interior that truly unsettled her. Everything was white. The floors, the walls, the furniture, all varying shades of ivory and cream, creating a space that felt simultaneously infinite and claustrophobic. But it was the precision that made her skin crawl. Every piece of furniture sat at exact angles. Every book on the minimalist shelves aligned perfectly. Even the decorative objects seemed positioned with mathematical certainty. "The main living area," Mijin announced, walking forward with practiced steps. "Mr. Han spends most of his time in the study, which is off limits unless you're specifically called to clean it. The kitchen operates on a schedule. Meals are prepared at exact times. Breakfast at 6:47 a.m., lunch at 1:13 p.m., dinner at 7:31 p.m. "Those are very specific times," Amale observed. "Mr. Han is a very specific person." Mijin continued the tour, pointing out zones and restrictions with the enthusiasm of someone reading a legal document. "Your quarters are here, separate entrance, private bathroom, but connected to the main space through this corridor. You're expected to be available between 5 a.m. and midnight. Your duties include general maintenance, meal preparation following exact recipes that will be provided, and ensuring that nothing, absolutely nothing, is out of place." Amale followed, trying to absorb the overwhelming amount of information. They passed through a hallway lined with abstract art, geometric paintings that hurt to look at for too long, all sharp angles and uncomfortable symmetry. "Questions?" Mijin asked, though her tone suggested questions were not particularly welcome. "When will I meet Mr. Han?" "He's not here currently. Business in Seoul. He'll return tomorrow evening." Mijin checked her watch with the precision of someone for whom every second mattered. "Use today to familiarize yourself with the space. The manual is on the kitchen counter. 47 pages. Read it completely. 47 pages of instructions for cleaning an apartment." Amala felt dizzy. After Mijin left, Amali stood alone in the vast white space, feeling like a smudge on a blank canvas. She walked slowly through the rooms, afraid to touch anything, half convinced her presence alone was contaminating the sterile perfection. The kitchen was a marvel of modern design. Induction cooktop, industrial-grade appliances, everything gleaming chrome and spotless surfaces. She found the manual Mijin had mentioned, a thick binder with typed instructions and diagrams showing the exact placement of every item, down to the angle of dish towels on their rack. As she flipped through the pages, a sense of unreality washed over her. This wasn't a home. It was a museum, a laboratory, a place where life had been systematized into protocols and procedures. She wandered into the main living area, drawn to the windows. The view was breathtaking, the ocean stretching to the horizon, boats leaving white trails across blue water, the city breathing below. For a moment, she felt the vastness of her situation. She was 47 floors above ground, in a glass cage, bound by contracts and obligations to a man she'd met once, whose touch had felt like a brand. That's when she noticed something out of place. On the coffee table, positioned at a perfect 90-degree angle to the couch, sat a stack of books about architecture and design. But between the third and fourth book, something glinted. Amali approached carefully, her cleaning instincts making her notice what didn't belong. It was a pendant. Small, silver, tarnished with age. A simple letter H was engraved on its surface, the lines worn smooth by time and touch. It was the kind of thing a child would wear, innocent, personal, completely incongruous with the cold perfection surrounding it. She picked it up, and the metal was warm, as if someone had been holding it recently. As she examined it, turning it over in her palm, she heard the soft sound of a door opening behind her. She spun around to find a man standing in the entrance. Not Jaseok, but someone else. He was shorter, stockier, with a face that had seen too much sun, and eyes that assessed her with the calculation of someone trained to identify threats. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice carrying the rough edge of Busan's dialect. "I'm Amali, the new," she wasn't sure what to call herself, "employee?" His eyes narrowed. "You Sang-min. I work with Mr. Han." He stepped closer, and she noticed the way he moved, controlled, efficient, dangerous. "Why are you holding that?" "I found it. It was just lying here, between the books. I thought it had fallen." Sang-min's expression hardened. He crossed the space in 3 strides and took the pendant from her hand with more force than necessary. "This area is not for touching. Only cleaning. I'm sorry, I didn't—" "Why are you here?" he interrupted, slipping the pendant into his jacket pocket. "What makes you so special that he'd bring you here?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications Amali didn't understand. Before she could respond, Sang-min continued, his voice dropping to something almost like a warning. "People don't come to this place by accident, and they definitely don't stay unless there's a reason." He studied her face with an intensity that made her want to step back. "Whatever you think this is, whatever story you've been told, it's incomplete. Mr. Han doesn't need a cleaner. He needs something else, and I'm not sure even he knows what." "I don't understand," Amale whispered. "That's the problem," Sang-min replied. He moved toward the door, then paused, glancing back with an expression she couldn't quite read. Concern, maybe, or pity. "For your own safety, Ms. Duarte. Maybe you shouldn't try to understand. Just do your job, and don't ask questions." He left, and the apartment felt even emptier than before. Amali stood frozen, the pendant's warmth still ghosting across her palm. She looked around at the perfect space, the exact angles, the controlled environment, and for the first time, she understood what Mijin had meant. This wasn't about cleanliness at all. This was about a man trying desperately to hold something together that had broken a long time ago. And somehow, impossibly, she'd become part of whatever fragile structure he'd built, to keep himself from falling apart. The first week passed in a rhythm that felt both endless and suffocating. Amali learned quickly that living in Jisek's penthouse was like existing inside a clock. Every action measured, every moment accounted for, every deviation from routine noticed with uncomfortable precision. She woke at 4:53 a.m. each morning, giving herself 7 minutes to shower and dress before beginning her duties. By 5:47 a.m., she had the kitchen prepared for breakfast. At exactly 6:47 a.m., she would set out his meal, always the same. Miyok guk, prepared with specific measurements, rice that had to be precisely 3 hours old, and banchan arranged in a pattern she'd memorized from the manual's diagrams. But Jisuk never ate with her present. She would leave the meal on the table, retreat to the kitchen, and return 15 minutes later to find the dishes emptied, rinsed, and already placed in the exact position where they belonged in the dishwasher. As if he couldn't bear even the small chaos of dirty dishes existing for longer than necessary. 3 days passed before she saw him again. It was a Wednesday evening. She remembered because she'd been on the phone with her mother, whose voice had grown stronger after the procedure. The relief of hearing that improvement had made Amali cry in her small room, quiet tears of gratitude and exhaustion. She'd ended the call and stepped out into the hallway to find Jiseok standing by the living room windows, silhouetted against the city lights. He didn't turn when she entered, but she knew he'd heard her. His posture changed slightly, shoulders tensing, head tilting just a fraction, as if her presence had disrupted some internal calculation. "Your mother is recovering well," he said, his voice carrying across the space with that same unsettling certainty he'd shown in Miryang. A statement, not a question. "How do you know that?" Amali asked, too tired to hide her unease. "I make it my business to know the well-being of people under my responsibility. Under his responsibility." The phrase made her feel like a possession, something acquired and catalogued. Over the following days, Amali began to notice things that the manual hadn't prepared her for. The way Jiseok would touch doorframes as he passed through them. 3 taps, always 3. How he would arrange his workspace each morning with ritualistic precision, measuring distances between objects with his eyes, adjusting by millimeters until some invisible standard was met. The way he would pause before sitting, as if gathering courage for the simple act of occupying space. It wasn't arrogance, she realized with startling clarity one morning, while watching him realign a painting that had shifted a fraction of a degree. It was fear. He was terrified of disorder the way some people feared heights or darkness, a primal, consuming terror that demanded constant vigilance. On her 8th day, while cleaning the main bathroom, she found small scratches on the inside of his medicine cabinet door. Not random marks, but deliberate counts. Dozens of them, organized in groups of 5 like someone marking time in a cell. She touched them with trembling fingers, imagining the person who'd made them, tallying something she couldn't comprehend. "Those are old." Jisek's voice came from behind her, making her jump. She hadn't heard him approach. From another life. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, dressed in casual clothes for the first time she'd seen. Dark jeans and a simple white shirt that somehow made him look younger, more vulnerable. "I'm sorry, I wasn't snooping, I was just... You were cleaning, that's what you're here for." But his tone lacked its usual edge. He looked tired, she realized. Not physically exhausted like she'd been that night in Miryang, but tired in a deeper way, as if existence itself required more energy than he could sustainably provide. "Can I ask you something?" Amali heard herself say, surprising them both. He considered her for a long moment. "You can ask. I may not answer." "Why did you bring me here? Really? You don't need someone to clean. This place practically cleans itself. And you certainly don't need someone to cook meals you could have delivered by a dozen different services." She stepped forward, emboldened by his unusual openness. "What am I actually doing here?" Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the carefully maintained facade. For just a second, she saw beneath it, loneliness so profound it made her chest ache, and a desperate, barely controlled need for something he couldn't name. "You fell asleep in my chair," he said quietly, as if that explained everything. "In 17 years, no one has ever done that. They're all too afraid, too careful. But you..." He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "You were so tired you didn't even think about the rules. And when I touched your shoulder to wake you, you didn't flinch. You didn't calculate your response. You just were. I don't understand. Neither do I, he admitted, and the vulnerability in those 3 words made her throat tighten. But since that moment, the numbers in my head are quieter. The patterns don't scream as loudly, and I don't know if that's dangerous or... He trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. The moment shattered. His expression closed again, walls rebuilding with visible effort. He glanced at the screen, and she saw his jaw tighten. I have to go out, he said, his voice returning to its usual controlled cadence. There's a situation that requires my attention. He left without another word, and Amali stood alone in the bathroom, processing what had just happened. She looked back at the scratches on the medicine cabinet door, counting them more carefully this time. 73 marks. What had he been counting? Days, losses, moments of weakness in whatever battle he fought inside his own mind? That evening, seeking some connection to normalcy, Amal ventured down to the building's common areas. She'd noticed another young woman, around her age, who seemed to live on one of the lower floors. They'd exchanged polite nods in the elevator a few times. She found her in the building's small library, a cozy space that felt jarring after the sterile perfection of the penthouse. The woman was reading a magazine, and she looked up with a warm smile as Amali entered. Hi, you're new here, right? I'm Yunsora. I live on the 32nd floor. Amali, she replied, grateful for the friendly face. I'm staying on the top floor. Sora's expression changed subtly, surprise mixing with something that looked like concern. Oh, you're working for Mr. Han. It wasn't a question. You know him? Amali asked. Everyone in the building knows of him, but no one really knows him, if that makes sense. Sora gestured for Amali to sit. He's been here for about 5 years, I think. Keeps completely to himself. The building staff won't even talk about him. I think they've all signed agreements or something. What do people say about him? Sora hesitated, clearly weighing her words. There are rumors. Nothing concrete, just observations. People who work for him tend to disappear from regular routines for long periods. Not in a scary way, she added quickly, seeing Amali's expression. More like they just become invisible, absorbed into whatever world he lives in up there. A chill ran through Amali. Has anyone ever left? Like, quit working for him? I don't know, Sora admitted. Like I said, it's all just rumors and speculation. But Amala, she leaned forward, her voice dropping. Be careful, okay? There's something about him that feels, I don't know, unfinished. Like he's carrying something too heavy, and anyone who gets too close might get crushed under the weight. As Amale rode the elevator back up to the 47th floor, Sora's words echoed in her mind. But so did Jiseok's confession. The numbers in my head are quieter. She was helping him somehow, even if neither of them understood how or why. But Sora was right about one thing. There was a weight pressing down on him, visible in every precise movement, every controlled breath, every desperate attempt to maintain order in a mind that felt like chaos. The question was, would helping him carry that weight save them both, or would it bury her alive? The call came at 3:17 a.m. on a Thursday, a time that Amali would remember for the rest of her life, because it marked the moment relief and imprisonment collided with devastating clarity. Her mother's voice, weak but undeniably alive, crackled through the phone speaker. Mina filha, I'm awake. The doctors say I can come home soon. Amali had cried so hard she thought her chest might crack open. 5 weeks of holding her breath, 5 weeks of living in this glass tower, 5 weeks of telling herself the sacrifice was worth it, and now, finally, confirmation that her mother would survive. The relief was so overwhelming it felt physical, like something unlocking inside her ribcage. But even as she clutched the phone, even as she whispered prayers of gratitude, a darker thought crept in. If her mother was recovering, did Amali still need to be here? The question haunted her through the morning routine. As she prepared Jiseok's breakfast with mechanical precision, as she aligned the banchan dishes according to the diagram she'd long since memorized, she felt the weight of the contract pressing against her consciousness like a stone. She needed to see her mother, needed to hold her hand, to prove to herself that the woman who'd raised her was truly coming back from the edge of the abyss. At 7:42 a.m., Jiseok emerged from his study. He looked different today. There were shadows under his eyes, and his shirt, though perfectly pressed, was wrinkled at the cuffs in a way she'd never seen before, as if he'd been pulling at the fabric during some long, sleepless night. "Good morning," Amali said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I need to talk to you about something." He paused mid-step, his hand still on the study door. "Go ahead. My mother, she's awake. She's recovering. The doctors say she can be discharged soon." The words came out in a rush. "I need to go see her. Just for a few days. I'll come back, I promise. No." The word fell like a guillotine. Amali felt her stomach drop. "What do you mean, no?" Jiseok finally turned to face her fully, and his expression was unreadable. Not angry, not apologetic, just absolute. "You can't leave the penthouse without authorization. Those are the terms. But she's my mother, and this is a matter of security," he interrupted, his voice taking on that clinical edge she'd learned to recognize as his way of distancing himself from emotion. "There are circumstances you don't understand, situations that require your presence here to remain controlled." "Controlled?" Amali's voice rose despite her best efforts. "I'm not a possession you can lock away. You signed a contract," Jiseok replied, and something in his tone made her blood run cold. Not cruelty, but something worse. Resignation, as if he were simply stating an unfortunate fact rather than imprisoning her. The terms were clear. "I signed that contract because you paid for my mother's procedure. You backed me into a corner. I gave you a choice," he said quietly. "You chose your mother's life. That choice has consequences." The words hung between them like poison gas. Amale felt her hands trembling, rage and helplessness battling for dominance in her chest. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to break through that infuriating calm that seemed to insulate him from normal human feeling. "What kind of person are you?" she whispered. For just a moment, something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or shame. But it vanished before she could be certain, replaced by that same controlled blankness. "The kind who keeps people safe," he said, even when they don't understand why. He retreated to his study, the door closing with a soft click that somehow sounded like a cell door locking. Amali stood frozen in the kitchen, her mother's joyful voice still echoing in her memory, now tainted by the realization of what her presence here actually meant. She wasn't an employee. She was a captive. The rest of the day passed in a fog. She cleaned with mechanical precision, her body performing tasks while her mind spiraled through increasingly desperate scenarios. Could she just leave, walk out the door and deal with the consequences? But the consequences meant her mother's care being revoked, the hospital bills becoming her burden again, an impossible weight that would crush them both. That evening, as twilight painted the ocean purple and gold beyond the windows, Amali retreated to her small room and pulled out the contract she'd signed in that Miryang cafe. She read through it with new eyes, searching for loopholes, for escape routes, for anything that might free her. That's when she found it, buried in the third addendum, in language so dense she'd skipped over it the first time, was a clause she'd never seen before. Or rather, that she hadn't noticed in her desperate haste to save her mother. Period of minimum residence. 12 months without authorized departures from primary location. Breach of residence requirement results in immediate termination of all financial agreements and return of all funds disbursed on behalf of the contracted party. 12 months. A full year. And she was only 5 weeks in. The document slipped from her fingers, floating to the floor like a death sentence rendered in legal terminology. This wasn't the contract she remembered signing. Or was it? Had she been so blinded by desperation that she'd missed this? Or had this page been added later, slipped in among the others when she wasn't paying attention? Her mind raced back to that moment in the cafe. Mijin's efficient presentation, the neat stack of papers, her own shaking hands as she signed page after page without reading. Had she been tricked? Or had she simply failed to protect herself? A soft knock on her door made her jump. She opened it to find Sangmin standing in the hallway, his expression grim. "Ms. Duarte, we need to talk." She stepped back, letting him enter. He moved with that same controlled efficiency she'd noticed before, but tonight there was tension in his shoulders, as if he were carrying news he didn't want to deliver. "I heard about your mother," he said without preamble. "I'm sorry you can't go see her. Did you know about this?" Amali gestured to the contract on the floor. "This clause that basically makes me a prisoner?" Sangmin's jaw tightened. "I knew there were terms. I didn't know the specifics." He paused, seeming to wage some internal battle. "But But I need to warn you about something more immediate. There are people, dangerous people, who've become aware of your presence here. People who might try to use you to get to Mr. Han. Use me how? He has enemies, Ms. Duarte. The kind who don't care about collateral damage. Sangmin's voice dropped lower. You can't leave because the moment you step outside this building without protection, you become a target. Not just for information, but for leverage. Amali felt the walls closing in. So I'm trapped here for my own safety? That's what you're telling me? I'm telling you that the world Mr. Han operates in isn't simple. And whether he brought you here intentionally or not, you're part of it now. What does that mean? Whether he brought me here intentionally? Sangmin looked at her with something that might have been pity. Mr. Han is very careful about who enters his life. Very deliberate. But with you, he shook his head. I've worked with him for 8 years. I've never seen him act impulsively. Until that night, you fell asleep in his office. Something about that moment broke through his usual control, and I think that scares him more than any external threat. After Sangmin left, Amale sat on her bed, staring at the contract on the floor. 12 months, 52 weeks, 365 days. She thought of her mother, recovering in Sao Paulo without her. She thought of Jiseok's face when she'd asked to leave, that flash of something beneath the calm. She thought of the scratches in the medicine cabinet, the ritualistic touching of door frames, the desperate need for order that governed every moment of his existence. He was drowning in his own mind, and somehow, impossibly, her presence was a lifeline he didn't know how to release, but holding on to that lifeline was pulling her under too. As the city lights blinked on below, casting geometric shadows across her small room, Amale made a decision. She would find a way out of this, not by breaking the contract, but by understanding the man who'd written it, because somewhere between his fear and her imprisonment was a truth neither of them had acknowledged yet, and the only way forward was through that truth, no matter how painful the revelation might be. The tension in the penthouse had become a living thing, thick enough to choke on. 3 days had passed since Amali discovered the 12-month clause, and in those 3 days, the carefully maintained distance between her and Jiseok had collapsed into something far more complicated. He'd stopped retreating to his study when she was in the common areas. Instead, he would sit at the dining table, working on his laptop while she cleaned nearby, as if her presence had become necessary for him to function. She'd catch him watching her sometimes, not with the calculating assessment of those first days, but with something that looked almost like confusion, as if he were trying to solve an equation that had too many variables, and she found herself watching him back, studying the small tells that revealed the depth of his internal struggle. The way his fingers would drum against the table in patterns of 3, how he'd close his eyes and count silently before making any significant decision, the slight tremor in his hands when something disrupted his routine. On the 4th morning, while preparing breakfast, Amali decided to test a theory. Instead of placing his myeokguk in the exact center of the placemat as the manual dictated, she positioned it slightly to the left, maybe 2 centimeters off-center. Jiseok entered the dining area at precisely 6:47 a.m., as always. He sat down, reached for his spoon, and froze, his eyes fixed on the bowl. She watched from the kitchen doorway as his jaw tightened, his hand hovering in midair. For 15 seconds, he didn't move. Then slowly, he reached out and adjusted the bowl, 2 centimeters to the right, back to its proper position. His shoulders relaxed visibly. He looked up and found her watching him. "You did that on purpose," he said. Not an accusation, just an observation. "I wanted to understand," Amali replied, stepping into the dining area. "What it feels like for you when things aren't right. It feels like drowning," he said quietly, surprising her with his honesty. "Like the world is tilting, and I'm the only one who can feel it. Every misalignment is a scream in my head that won't stop until I fix it. That sounds exhausting." "It is." He set down his spoon without eating. "My sister used to say I was trying to control the ocean by counting the waves. She was right, but I couldn't stop. And eventually, the counting couldn't save her." It was the first time he'd mentioned his sister directly. Amali sat down across from him, uninvited, but no longer afraid of his reaction. "What happened to her?" Jiseok's fingers found the edge of the table, tapping 3 times before he answered. "She got sick when she was 12. Leukemia. The doctors said we had time, that the treatment was working, but I was 17, and I thought if I could just organize everything perfectly, her medication schedule, her diet, the hospital visits, I could force the universe to let her live. His voice cracked almost imperceptibly. She died 3 days after I turned 18. And I realized that all my counting, all my ordering, all my desperate attempts at control, they were completely meaningless. Amal felt tears burning her eyes. I'm so sorry. The pendant you found, that was hers. She gave it to me the night before she passed. Said I needed something to hold on to that wasn't a system or a schedule. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was so raw it hurt to witness. I've carried it for 15 years, and I still don't know what to hold on to. Before Amale could respond, the sound of the elevator arriving shattered the moment. They both turned as Sangmin emerged, his face pale, his usual composure cracked. We have a problem, he said without greeting. A serious one. Jisuk stood immediately, his emotional vulnerability vanishing behind the controlled mask he wore like armor. What kind of problem? Your private files have been accessed. Someone inside the organization breached the security protocols. Sangmin's eyes flicked to Amale, then back to Jiseok. Financial records, business contacts, personal information, everything. It's being leaked to outside parties. The color drained from Jiseok's face. When? The breach started 3 weeks ago. We only discovered it this morning when one of our competitors suddenly knew details of a deal we haven't finalized yet. Sangmin pulled out a tablet, showing screens full of data that meant nothing to Amale but clearly devastated Jiseok. It's sophisticated, professional, and it's coming from someone with high-level access. Jiseok's hand found the table edge, tapping once, twice, 3 times. His breathing had changed, shorter, more controlled, as if he were manually operating lungs that had forgotten how to function automatically. Who has that level of access? Amale asked, though she already suspected the answer. Sangmin's expression darkened. Only 3 people. Myself, Mijin, and... He stopped, the words clearly difficult to force out. The security logs show the access codes used. They're mine. The silence that followed was deafening. Jisuk stared at Sangmin, the man he'd trusted for 8 years, the man who'd been his right hand through whatever dark business dealings he conducted. And Amale watched something fundamental break in his expression. You? Jiseok's voice was barely above a whisper. No, Sangmin said firmly. Someone stole my credentials. Someone who knows my routines well enough to access the system when I wouldn't notice. Someone inside the inner circle. Who? I don't know yet. But whoever it is, they've been watching all of us for weeks. They know about Ms. Duarte. They know about the contract. They know... Sangmin hesitated. They know about your sister. About the pendant. About why you brought Amale here. Jiseok's control shattered visibly. His hand slammed against the table. Not in anger, but in desperation. The controlled facade crumbling to reveal the terrified man beneath. Get out. Sir, we need to... Get out. The command was raw, broken. Both of you. I need to think. Sangmin nodded slowly and retreated to the elevator. But as Amale moved to follow, Jiseok's voice stopped her. Not you. She turned back to find him standing with his back to the windows, silhouetted against the morning light. His shoulders were shaking, barely perceptible, but unmistakable. You wanted to know why I brought you here, he said, his voice hollow. The truth is, I don't know. That night in Miryang, when you fell asleep in my chair, for the first time in 15 years, the noise in my head stopped, just for a moment, and I've been chasing that silence ever since, trying to understand it, trying to control it. He turned to face her, and his eyes were wet. But I can't control you. I can't systematize what you make me feel, and that terrifies me more than any breach or betrayal or threat. Amale's heart hammered in her chest. What do I make you feel? Human, he whispered. Dangerously, impossibly human. The confession hung between them, vulnerable and raw. Before either could speak again, Jiseok's phone rang. He answered it, listened for 10 seconds, and the remaining color drained from his face. They've released information about the Daegu deal, he said to no one in particular. 3 years of negotiations destroyed in a single leak. He looked at Amale with eyes that had gone dead. This isn't just about money. Someone is trying to dismantle everything I've built, and they're using my own people to do it. He grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair, his movements mechanical, robotic. I need to go. Damage control. I don't know when I'll be back. Jisuk, Amale started, but he held up a hand. Don't leave this penthouse, he said, his voice regaining some of its old authority. If I'm right about who's behind this, you're not safe outside these walls. And despite everything, despite the contract, despite trapping you here, I can't." He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. He left without another word, and Amale stood alone in the vast white space, feeling the weight of his confession settling over her like snow. She walked to the spot where she'd found the pendant weeks ago, and there, tucked between the same books, she found something new, a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. She opened it carefully. Inside, in a child's handwriting, was a simple message. "Appa, stop counting the bad things and start counting the good things. Love, Hana." Amali's tears finally fell, understanding blooming like a painful flower in her chest. He hadn't brought her here to replace his sister. He'd brought her here because for one brief moment, she'd made him forget to count. And someone who knew that, someone who understood his weakness, was using it to destroy him. Hours blurred into each other as Amale waited. The sun tracked across the sky, painting the penthouse in shifting shades of gold and amber, then purple, then the deep blue of evening. Still, Jisok didn't return. She tried to distract herself with routine, preparing dinner at the exact prescribed time even though no one would eat it, cleaning surfaces that were already spotless, organizing things that had never been disorganized. But the mechanical motions only amplified the silence, making the emptiness of the space feel oppressive, suffocating. At 11:47 p.m. her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize, but with a Seoul area code. "Ms. Duarte?" The voice was female, crisp, unfamiliar. "This is Yang Ji-woo from Seoul Metropolitan Hospital. I'm calling about Han Ji-seok." Amale's heart stopped. "What happened? Is he okay?" "He's stable now, but he was brought in 2 hours ago experiencing severe anxiety symptoms. Hyperventilation, elevated heart rate, disorientation. The attending physician wants to keep him for observation, but he's refusing to stay. He keeps saying he needs to get back to Busan, that someone isn't safe." "I'm coming," Amale said without thinking. "I'm not sure that's—" "Tell him I'm coming. Tell him to stay there until I arrive." She ended the call and stood frozen for 3 seconds, Sangmin's warnings echoing in her mind. "You can't leave. It's not safe. You're a target." But beneath those warnings was a more fundamental truth. Jisok was falling apart, and she was the only person who seemed able to help hold him together. She grabbed her jacket and was halfway to the elevator when it opened, revealing not Jisok, but Mijin. The woman's usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, her hair escaping its tight bun, her blouse wrinkled, her eyes red-rimmed and wild. "Where is he?" Mijin demanded, her voice cracking with an emotion Amale had never heard from her before. "Where's Mr. Han?" "Seoul. The hospital. What's happening?" "Everything is collapsing," Mijin said, stepping into the penthouse with unsteady movements. "The Daegu deal is dead. 3 major partners have severed contracts. The board is calling for an emergency meeting. And the leak—" She stopped, her hand pressed against her chest as if physically holding herself together. "The leak came from my computer, my personal terminal. They're saying I'm the one who betrayed him." "Did you?" Amale asked, though something in Mijin's devastation told her the answer. "I've worked for him for 6 years, Mijin whispered. 6 years of my life devoted to maintaining his world, protecting his routines, managing his chaos. Why would I destroy that?" Tears streamed down her face, shocking in their rawness. "But someone used my credentials. Someone who knew my passwords, my access codes, my schedule. Who would have that information? Only—" Mijin's face went pale. "Only someone very close to the operation. Someone who's been watching all of us." Her eyes found Amale's. "When did Sangmin tell you about the breach?" "This morning. He said someone stole his credentials." "That's impossible," Mijin said, her voice gaining strength as her analytical mind kicked into gear despite her emotional state. "Sangmin's security protocols are military grade. You can't just steal his credentials. But mine—" She stopped, a horrifying realization dawning across her features. "I gave him access. 3 weeks ago, he said he needed to review some personnel files, and I logged him into my terminal because his was being updated." The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. "Sangmin," Amale breathed. "He's been with Mr. Han for 8 years, Mijin said, her voice hollow. "Why would he betray him now?" Before Amale could answer, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Check the security footage from 3 weeks ago. 2:47 a.m. Camera 7. Then you'll understand. Mijin's tablet was already in her hands, fingers flying across the screen. She pulled up the penthouse's security system, navigating to the date and time specified. The footage loaded, grainy and dark, showing the entrance to Jiseok's study. At 2:47 a.m., a figure emerged, Sangmin, carrying something small in his hand. He approached the door, used a keycard, and disappeared inside. 7 minutes later, he emerged, empty-handed. What was he carrying? Amale asked. Mijin rewound the footage, zooming in. The image was blurry, but recognizable. The pendant. Hana's pendant. He took it from the study, Mijin whispered. But why? It's not valuable. It's everything. Amale interrupted, understanding flooding through her. It's the one thing Jiseok can't systematize or control. It represents his failure to save his sister. And Sangmin knew that. He's been using it, using the emotional weight of it, to manipulate him. Mijin's tablet buzzed with an incoming video call. She answered without checking the caller ID, and Sangmin's face filled the screen. He was in what looked like a hotel room, his expression calm, almost serene. I was wondering when you'd figure it out, he said. Why? Mijin's voice broke on the word. Why would you do this to him? Because he's weak, Sangmin replied simply. I spent 8 years watching him count door frames and align pencils and measure distances between objects, thinking he was strong because he controlled his environment. But then she showed up. His eyes found Amale through the screen, and suddenly all that control evaporated. He became sentimental, vulnerable. Everything I'd helped him build was crumbling because he couldn't stop obsessing over a cleaning woman who reminded him of loss. You're doing this because he cares about me? Amale asked, incredulous. I'm doing this because sentiment is a liability in our world, Sangmin corrected. Mr. Han built an empire by being calculating, precise, emotionless. But you walked into his office, fell asleep in his chair, and somehow convinced him that feeling something was worth the risk. That's not just dangerous for him. It's dangerous for everyone who depends on his strength. So you're destroying him to save him? Mijin's voice dripped with bitter sarcasm. I'm teaching him that emotions have consequences, Sangmin said. When everything he's built collapses, when he loses his business and his reputation, he'll remember why he created all those systems in the first place, why he counted and measured and controlled, and he'll be stronger for it. The screen went dark. Amale and Mijin stared at each other, the weight of the betrayal settling over them like ash. Then Amale's phone rang again. The hospital. Ms. Duarte? Mr. Han has left. He signed himself out against medical advice about 20 minutes ago. He said he was coming home. 37 minutes later, the elevator opened, and Jiseok stepped out. He looked like he'd aged a decade since morning. His suit wrinkled, his hair disheveled, his eyes hollow with exhaustion and betrayal. He stopped when he saw both women waiting for him. You know, he said. Not a question. We know, Mijin confirmed quietly. Something in Jiseok's expression crumbled. He walked past them to the window wall, pressing his forehead against the glass as if the cold surface might somehow organize the chaos inside him. 8 years, he whispered. I trusted him with everything. With my business, my secrets, my... He stopped, his hand forming a fist against the glass. He was right. I became weak. I let emotions cloud my judgment. I broke my own rules, and this is the consequence. No, Amale said, surprising herself with the force of the word. She crossed the space between them, standing close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. He was wrong. You're not weak because you feel things. You're not broken because you can't control everything. You're human. That's not a flaw. It's what makes you real. Jiseok turned to face her, and the pain in his eyes was so profound it made her chest ache. But being real hurts. Yes, she agreed softly. It does. But so does being alone in a perfect empty space, counting waves that never stop coming. He stared at her for a long moment, and she watched something shift behind his eyes. A decision being made, a calculation being abandoned. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the contract she'd signed, the one that bound her to this place, to him, to 12 months of captivity disguised as employment. Without a word, he tore it in half, then in half again, and again, until the pieces fluttered to the pristine white floor like snow. "You don't owe me anything," he said, his voice rough. "Not your time, not your presence, not your patience with my broken systems. Go see your mother. Go back to your life. Get away from this." He gestured vaguely at the penthouse, at himself, "before it pulls you under too." Amali looked at the pieces of paper scattered at their feet, at Mijin standing silently near the elevator, at the vast empty space that had been both prison and sanctuary. Then she looked at Jisok, really looked at him, seeing not the controlled businessman or the obsessive perfectionist, but the scared boy who'd counted his way through his sister's death and never stopped. "What if I don't want to go?" she asked quietly. His eyes widened. "Why would you stay?" "Because someone needs to teach you that it's okay to stop counting." The flight to São Paulo felt both endless and too short. Jisok had insisted on arranging everything: first-class tickets, a car service, even accommodation near the hospital. And for once, Amale hadn't argued. She was too exhausted from the emotional upheaval of the previous night, too overwhelmed by the weight of her own decision to stay. But first, she needed to see her mother. Needed to prove to herself that the sacrifice, all the sacrifices, had been worth it. The hospital room was smaller than she remembered, painted in that universal beige that existed in medical facilities worldwide. But none of that mattered when she saw her mother sitting up in bed, thin but alive, her dark eyes lighting up with recognition and joy. "Minha filha," her mother whispered, and Amale collapsed into her arms, sobbing with a relief so profound it felt like her bones might dissolve. They held each other for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. When Amale finally pulled back, her mother's hands came up to cup her face, studying her with the penetrating gaze only mothers possess, the kind that sees past words into the truth beneath. "You look different," her mother said in Portuguese, her voice still weak but gaining strength. "Older, sadder. What's happened to you in Korea?" Amali tried to smile, tried to find words that would encompass everything: the penthouse, the contract, the man who counted door frames and carried his dead sister's pendant like a talisman against chaos. But where could she even begin? "I found work," she said finally. "Good work. It paid for your surgery, for everything. But at what cost?" Her mother's thumb brushed away a tear Amali hadn't realized had fallen. "I didn't raise you to sacrifice your freedom for my life. You would have done the same for me." "Yes, and I would have been wrong too." Her mother shifted, wincing slightly, and Amali immediately moved to help adjust her pillows. When they were both settled, her mother took her hand, holding it with surprising strength. "Tell me the truth, Filha. Are you where you want to be? Or are you where someone else has decided you should be?" The question hit like a physical blow. Amala thought about the contract torn into pieces on the penthouse floor, about Jisiok's hollow eyes when he'd told her to leave, to save herself, about her own words. "What if I don't want to go?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Both, maybe? Neither? I'm confused, Mai. There's this man. He's broken in ways I don't fully understand. But when I'm around him, I can see him trying to put the pieces back together. And somehow, impossibly, I make that easier for him. But is that enough reason to stay? To build my life around being someone's emotional support?" Her mother was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant with thought. "When your father died," she said finally, "people told me I should move on quickly. That grief was something to overcome, to systematize and process and file away. But grief doesn't work like that. Neither does healing." She squeezed Amali's hand. "The question isn't whether you help him. It's whether he respects your choice to help, whether he sees you as a person with your own needs and dreams, or just as a solution to his problems." The wisdom in those words settled over Amali like a blanket. She stayed for 3 more days, watching her mother grow stronger, feeling the fractured pieces of her own heart beginning to realign. And on the final day, as she prepared to return to Korea, her mother gave her one last piece of advice. "Don't stay because you feel obligated. Don't stay because you're afraid of what happens if you leave. Stay only if it's what your heart chooses freely. Everything else is just another kind of prison." The return flight gave Amali 13 hours to think, 13 hours to examine her feelings, to sort through the tangled mess of obligation and choice, and something deeper she wasn't quite ready to name. By the time the plane touched down in Busan, she knew what she needed to do. The penthouse was dark when she arrived, all the lights turned off except for the ambient glow from the city below. She found Jiseok on the terrace, a space she'd never seen him use before, standing at the railing, looking out over the ocean. The wind whipped his hair, and he'd abandoned his usual precise appearance for jeans and a simple shirt. He looked smaller somehow, more human without the armor of his expensive suits. He didn't turn when she stepped out, but she saw his shoulders tense, as if her presence had sent an electric current through him. "You came back," he said, his voice nearly lost in the wind. "I did." "Why?" Amale moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel his warmth, but not touching. "Because I talked to my mother, and she asked me if I was where I wanted to be, or where someone had put me." "And what did you tell her?" "I told her I didn't know." She paused, gathering courage. "But I do know now. I'm here because I choose to be. Not because of a contract, not because I owe you for my mother's surgery, not because I'm afraid of the consequences if I leave. I'm here because—" She stopped, forcing herself to speak the truth, even though it terrified her. "Because I want to help you learn how to stop drowning in your own mind, but only if that's what you want to." Jiseok finally turned to face her, and in the dim light, she could see that his eyes were wet. "I spent 15 years building systems to protect myself from feeling anything, from loss, from pain, from the chaos of caring about someone who might leave or die or disappoint me. And then you fell asleep in my chair, and everything I'd built started crumbling. I thought that made me weak. And now? Now I think maybe Hana was right. Maybe I've been counting the wrong things." His hand moved to his pocket, and he pulled out the silver pendant, the metal catching the light. "She told me to count the good things. I never understood what she meant. But when you're here, the numbers in my head are quieter. Not gone, but quieter. And for the first time since she died, I can imagine a life that isn't just about survival and control." Amale felt tears burning her eyes. "I can't fix you, Jiseok. That's not what this is. I know. I don't want you to fix me. I want—" He struggled with the words, a lifetime of emotional suppression making vulnerability feel like a foreign language. "I want to learn how to be okay with not being fixed, to exist in the mess without trying to organize it into submission. And I can't do that alone." "You're not alone," Amale said softly. She held out her hand, palm up, an offering rather than a demand. "But we need rules, real ones, not the kind written in contracts. You don't get to make decisions about my life without asking me. I'm not your employee, or your responsibility or your solution. I'm a person with my own needs and my own future to build. I understand. And if I stay, it's as your equal, your partner in whatever this is, not as someone who works for you or owes you." "Yes." He took her hand, his grip tentative, as if afraid she might disappear if he held on too tightly. "Equal. Partner. I don't know how to do this, but I want to learn." Amale looked down at their joined hands, at the pendant dangling from his other hand, catching the reflected lights of the city. Slowly, deliberately, she took the pendant from him and placed it in his palm, then closed his fingers around it. "From this point forward," she said, echoing the words he'd spoken to her that first night, "nobody belongs to anybody. We walk this path because we choose to. Each day is a new choice, and the moment either of us stops choosing freely, we stop." Jiseok nodded, understanding flooding his features. "Each day is a new choice," he repeated, as if committing the words to memory, adding them to the systems that governed his existence. But this time, as a reminder of freedom, rather than control. They stood together on the terrace, as the wind carried the salt smell of the ocean, and the distant sounds of the city living its life below. And for the first time since Hana's death, Jiseok stopped counting, stopped measuring, stopped trying to impose order on the beautiful, terrifying chaos of simply being alive with another person. It wasn't a cure. It wasn't a solution. It was just a beginning, fragile and uncertain and absolutely real. And sometimes, that was enough. In the end, this story is not only about two lives crossing paths in the most unlikely way. It is about the fragile line between choice and obligation, between holding on and letting go. When Amale finally stepped forward on her own terms, she reminded us that freedom is not something handed to us. It is something we must claim, even when fear whispers louder than hope. And when Jiseok chose vulnerability over control, he showed that change begins the moment we stop running from what hurts. But ask yourself this: if you were in Amale's place, exhausted, alone in a foreign land, Suddenly dependent on someone whose presence both protected and unsettled you, what would you have done? Would you have walked away the moment the door opened, or stayed long enough to see the truth behind a guarded heart? And if you were Jisuk, facing the weight of your past and the fear of losing control, would you have had the courage to set someone free, knowing they might never return? Stories like this linger because they confront us with the choices we fear making. They remind us that love without freedom is a cage, and freedom without courage is an empty room. In the quiet after the final scene, the question remains: when life places you at a crossroads between safety and honesty, between fear and clarity, which path will you choose?